Perfect. So we've been comparing our progress and where we're at, and just yeah, sharing as we go. And I've had so many positive comments about your amazing website and the amazing
Oh,
resources that you've provided for knitters.
oh, awesome. Oh, I'm so glad. That's always my goal. I always want just a nice, enjoyable knitting experience for everyone. So I know the more tutorials, the better. So
Yeah.
awesome. So when did it officially kick off last week?
So it was January 8th was our official kickoff, but
Okay.
like I told you, we're a little bit more flexible. And so we were like, some people were just too excited. And of course they had to cast on as soon as they got their yarn, and
Yeah,
other
oh, of
people
course.
waited for the accident day. And we've got some people still waiting for their yarn, or they're like, I've got to finish this first work in progress and then I'll hop in. So we're all at
Yeah.
different places, but
Yeah.
there's
Part of the fun of the knit along, right? There'll always be someone that'll have it completely finished in like a week time span, and then other people are still swatching, you know?
And I have to say, we have a couple of overachievers that I've heard of that are either concurrently making both the pullover and the cardigan,
Wow.
or they're doing so well with their timing. Like we had one person who last weekend, she's like, yeah, well, I mean, I'm getting right down to my waistband on my cardigan. I'm gonna just buy the yarn for the pullover now, and I'll have something to look forward to. It'll keep my momentum. And I was like, great.
That's awesome. Very cool. Yeah, I guess while you're in the groove of it and you have your make ones all figured out, and you might as well just keep it going.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
I love your
So
cowl that you're wearing. What yarn is that?
okay, it was an old pattern from Knitty mag. Remember Knitty
Oh
mag?
yeah, yeah, totally.
So this is the Sala cowl. So it's SALLAH. And the weird thing about it is it's knit on like a size 4 and a size 10 alternating. So it makes for this like incredibly, oh, sorry. Decline. Makes for this super stretchy fabric that is sort of weirdly like you can reverse it and see on that side. Like
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
the
that's
skinny,
neat.
like it was like I want to say it was like a size 6 and a size 10 or something really wacky, but it's the perfect little just flip it over and forget it. And then Pat over here is wearing her Sophie scarf, which seems like
Oh,
it's
nice. I actually just made that for a good friend of mine. It was her birthday, and it was totally her style. So I decided I so rarely knit. I so rarely get to knit leisurely. But I did it for her, and it's a really great pattern, isn't it?
It is wonderful.
Yeah.
Fast. It's fast, and it's
Yeah,
so
exactly.
finished when you're finished.
What yarn did you use for yours?
Oh, I don't remember. It was left over from another project,
Oh, okay.
and it just suited perfectly. So I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah. Hey, if it's stash yarn, even better, right?
Stash yarn, yes.
one thing that I was curious about before we get going, Elizabeth, have you noticed an uptick in your Ramona pattern sales?
I did actually. Definitely. So thank you so much. No, it's been really
So
nice
much
to see,
fun.
and a pretty wide assortment between the 3 different Ramonas. So that was kind of interesting. It seemed, haven't done an actual count of them, but it seemed pretty varied between the original, the light, and the pullover.
Yep. The other last Sunday when we had the meetup in the shop, in the first, because we have sort of broken it down into 2 sessions, and in the first session, there was sort of some self-segregation without really realizing it. We had a table full of pullover people and a table full of cardigan people. Just by chance.
Oh, that's so funny.
Oh yeah.
So how many did you have this last Sunday? Was it as many as the Sunday before?
It wasn't, and so that's why we're not going to do a sign up this week for in person, because it seemed like the numbers are really starting to regulate themselves. So we had, I don't know, probably 8 in the first session and 6 or 7 in the second. So we've
That's
got
pretty
room.
manageable.
And yeah, much. And also I think too that then this is where it's our first knit along. We're learning as we go, and of course, at the beginning of a project, and especially when we've purposely included folks who have, a lot of varying ability levels, there's going to be that, oh my gosh, we're all starting. Oh, what does this mean? And people highlighting their patterns and like talking through, and so having extra staff probably on hand for that first in-person meetup is probably a good thing, and then we'll see. Yeah, and who knows, when we get to button band world, I'm like, we're gonna need all hands on deck again.
Extra resources for picking up and knitting stitches.
Totally, yeah. Good. Well, I'm gonna give it like a couple last minutes because I want to honor your time.
Yeah, when I used to work at a yarn shop for many years, and we found a similar thing with our knit alongs. The first one was always the big all hands on deck, because a lot of people were swatching and were measuring swatches and kind of explaining the lay of the land with the pattern and everything, and it kind of becomes more of like a kickoff party for the first one, and then it starts to, people get more serious then as it goes on.
Well, and here was another thing that we were just talking about, Kristen and myself today, was maybe we can also encourage folks, just say, hey, if you want to cast on and count and then bring, then come to the meetup, because some people are like, it's like, I'm having trouble focusing on my numbers. I'm a bad counter anyway. So now I'm like listening. So that could be a good option too, to let people know that they could do that in the time. But there were some people like, I didn't know if I was supposed to start before we met. So yeah.
You can have
I'm gonna go.
So you could have a chatting meetup once everybody gets to the body, and you're just sort of, exactly.
Okay, I'm gonna go let my dog in the house so she'll stop barking, and I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna hit record, and we're gonna go. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Oh, I'm already recording. Great. Okay, so welcome to our Wednesday night Ramona meetup. Tonight we have a super special opportunity to chat with Elizabeth Smith, the designer of the Ramona sweaters. I'm Iris Eichenlaub. I work at the Goat, and we're just so excited to have Elizabeth here with us, and she's going to be with us for about 15-ish minutes, maybe 20. And I have some questions to kind of kick things off. And then if you all have your own questions, that's awesome. You can pop them in the chat. And if you're new to Zoom, if you kind of hover your mouse down towards the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a chat button. Feel free to pop a question in the chat. It might be easier for me to see. Sometimes it's like hard for me to see who might be raising their hand. So if that works for you, and if not, just like feel free to unmute yourself and bust in, and we'll get to it that way. I'm gonna go ahead and let's see. Could everybody just mute themselves? And I'm just gonna watch just to make sure everybody's muted. And we'll keep Elizabeth unmuted. I'm going to pin Elizabeth so that she's our, she's the spotlight person. Awesome. So Elizabeth, thank you again. This is super generous of you to come and pop in. We've had so much fantastic enthusiasm for this. And as I said, a lot of really, really positive feedback about your way of writing patterns, about the care that you've taken to edit. It shows up, and it's made it really an accessible pattern for so many knitters. So thank you for that too.
Oh, well, thank you for those kind words. Appreciate that.
Well, obviously you put a lot into making patterns that, really speak to style and speak to growing a knitter's skills. So, without further ado, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to knitwear design?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Well, thank you again for having me. I put my Ramona pullover on to celebrate our evening. I even put the Ramona cardigan on my dress form back there. So we're all dressed up. So I'm Elizabeth Smith. I have been designing knitting patterns for, I was trying to count, somewhere between 12 and 15 years. I believe my first pattern I ever published was back in 2008, and it was the little coffee bean baby cardigan. I don't know if anyone's ever knit that. It's a freebie pattern on Ravelry and on my website. That was my very first design, and I haven't stopped since. So I guess I'll first just tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Freeport, Maine, so just a bit south of the Cashmere Goat. I've lived here for a while now, about 18 years or so. I'm not originally, I'm from away, as they say here, though, although Maine is definitely home. So I'm originally, I was born in New York, in the Bronx, and but spent most of my growing up years in Connecticut, just outside the city. But moved to Maine here about 18 years ago, and it has been home ever since. So designing, as I said, designing somewhere around 15 years ago. I started because I became really fascinated with patterns in general. I'm a bit of a math nerd. I love an Excel spreadsheet. And I was after I learned to knit and I started wanting to like edit patterns myself and kind of make them my own a bit, or maybe getting a little frustrated with how certain patterns were written and figuring out how can I deconstruct this, because I feel like maybe I can figure out a different way. And I just became really fascinated with it. So it really started with just editing patterns to kind of make it work for myself and my own style. And I started dabbling with, okay, now that I know how to edit things on my own, let me see if I can start from scratch. And so I did it a little bit at a time. At the time when I first started, I was working in advertising. That was sort of my professional background. I worked in the ad industry for over a decade or so. It's what I went to school for. But I would come home at night and work on it and work on the weekends. And I did that for quite a long time and just kept at it for a really long time. I studied every knitting design book I can get my hands on. It was a lot of trial and error, and it's a little tricky when you're doing that with knitting design because it takes a long time to knit something, and often I would design something, knit it up, have to rip it out, start all over again. But I really was just so passionate about it, and so it just kept me at it year after year after year. And eventually I'd probably say about 5 years after I had started, I got a job at a yarn shop down in Portland, Maine. And I was there for about 8 years part-time. And I was still always doing other work on the side as well. And I continue to do that. I don't work in advertising anymore, but I've done work in tech and project management and things like that. But I was able to steadily grow my knitting business. And I would say working at a yarn shop was probably the most helpful part of becoming a knitting designer, because I got to see firsthand the questions that knitters had. And there's no better learning experience for a designer than working at a yarn shop, because you not only just learn about yarn in general and all of that important information, but you get to work one-on-one with with customers, and you start to see where the areas in a pattern that they tend to get stuck on, and what would be a different way to word this, and understanding that everybody sort of takes in information different. Everybody has a different sort of filter when they're looking through a pattern. That was always a really fascinating experience to see how everybody's brain would read an instruction maybe slightly different. So during this time, I was always kind of perfecting my way of writing that could work for lots of different knitters, whether they were more beginner knitters or more advanced. So that became just such a great experience. And it definitely, I feel like made me the designer that I am today, and that I really focus so much, not just on the aesthetic side, that obviously is very important, but I put just as much importance and weight on the actual pattern writing portion of it, and making sure that I'm providing a really enjoyable knitting experience for everybody. Because I know, again, especially from my experience working in a shop, I know how much knitting is comfort for people. Knitting is therapy for a lot of people. Knitting is the thing you turn to at the end of the day to just sort of unplug, unwind, and relax. And so I want my patterns to provide that sort of enjoyment and relaxation. So that's sort of my story of getting into design. And I have to say, I'm always so grateful for everyone who's knitting my patterns, because I truly I love what I do. I love every aspect of it. Probably the only aspect that maybe gives me a little anxiety is when I first publish a pattern, and there's always that nerve-wracking, like, are they gonna like it? And it's always very vulnerable to put your work out there, and especially on the internet. But most knitters are so kind, so I should never be nervous. But I really do enjoy every aspect of it, and I'm so I feel very grateful to be able to provide knitting patterns to everybody.
I love that you made mention of the fact that how folks take information in differently, and that's for sure something that we resonate with working at the Goat. But it actually speaks to a really specific conversation I had with Kristen, the shop owner, and she was saying, as she was reading through the pattern, as a really experienced knitter as she is, there were times where she was like parsing what had been written and realizing like it was written sort of more in a narrative way, and then it was written in pattern language. And so we had a discussion about how like that's really a departure from some of the knitting patterns that we grew up on or learned on.
Yeah.
But to hear you say that so intentionally, that is specifically for you're reaching different ways of how people will comprehend the information, which I think is really a benefit in terms of access.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think that definitely that experience at the yarn shop really helped with that. I think also my experience, working in advertising and marketing and communications, and then I later worked in technology, where often I was as a project manager, I was having to translate kind of highly technical stuff in a very more common sort of way to explain things, and that's why I've kind of always enjoyed being able to work kind of in these different worlds, because they always seem to be able to help one another, and I think that definitely was another way. It's always, I think, amazing for all of us, like how our different past jobs or life experiences or volunteer working might do, whatever, it all kind of impacts, things that we do that aren't even related to it, because it just gives you a different perspective. It puts your mind, in somebody else's shoes or somebody else's brain a little bit.
Completely.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have a question about the design, the sort of process of design with the 3 Ramona sweaters. Like, tell us the story of Ramona and how she came to be.
Yeah, definitely. So I was actually looking this up recently about what the date that it published. It was actually 2013. So we are celebrating the 10-year. Ramona's 10. So that's exciting. It became inspired by, I was working late at the yarn shop one day, and I kind of fell in love with this beautiful gray yarn. And I decided, this happens, I don't know if this happens to you at the when you're working at the yarn shop, but you're there all the time, right? And so you're seeing all this yarn, you sort of marinated on it all the time, and then you just pull the trigger one day and you go crazy and you decide, this is it, I'm gonna get it. And my intention with it was, I wasn't even sure if I was going to turn it into a design. I actually was like, I just want a basic cardigan. That's all that I wanted to come from it. And it wound up being a great designer lesson for me at the time, because even as I sketched it out and, you know, figured out my plan, it was all about simplicity. I wanted little details in there to keep it interesting, but it was all about simplicity. And I remember even when I released it, I was like, no one's going to buy this. I think they're going to think it's too simple. Like I didn't think that there was enough in it. And it remains one of my most popular patterns. And so I think it definitely made me realize that that I'm not the only one that likes simplicity in my patterns, that, you know, I think from then forward, I really put a lot of weight on that if that's the kind of stuff I like to knit, I'm probably not the only one. And I also loved that it became a lot of people's first sweaters, and that really got me doing more in terms of creating tutorials and things like that, because I really loved people using my patterns as their sort of first experience, because I know how important that is. Because if you have a bad first experience, whether it's your first knitting project or your first sweater, it can really sort of, you know, taint your experience a little bit with it. That was my personal, what I learned to knit. The person who was teaching me decided a great first project would be a hat on double pointed needles as my first project. No, not even a circular and a straight, like double pointed. And I thought something was wrong with me. I was like, why can't I learn to knit? I can crochet, I can cross stitch. What's wrong with me? So my learn to knit experience was sort of not great in the beginning because of that. And that's why ever since, you know, for first projects, I always say I try to set people up for success, because I think it's really important to have a great, you know, introduction to something new. So Ramona was a great lesson in that, and really got me into that sort of doing beginner tutorials and things like that. And so that was the first one. And I believe it was just a few years later, I had a lot of requests from people, especially people who lived in warmer climates, that really wanted a lighter weight version. And so Ramona Light then came after that. And then a few years ago, I know it was right before the pandemic, I think, is when the pullover, and I'd had plans to do a pullover for quite some time, and just, you know, too many other projects kept happening. So the pullover was the last version. And I'm not done yet. I have ideas. I definitely want to do a light version of the pullover. I've had a lot of requests for that. And I also think it would make an adorable baby and kid sweater as well. So that's in my queue. I have a very long list of queue of upcoming designs I hope to do. So, and I do, you know, I can, I don't know if the link has been shared before. I could put a link in the chat. I had done a blog post called Behind the Design Ramona, and it kind of goes into a little bit more detail about the design, and even the inspiration before, you know, the broken rib stitch pattern is very prevalent in this design. And it actually, I was inspired to use it because I had this leaflet that was from my grandmother that she had gotten from her yarn shop in the Bronx back in the 1960s. And I have a picture of it on the blog post. It's kind of a cool little thing, but I'd always wanted to incorporate that stitch pattern. And so Ramona kind of seemed perfect for it. So I'll make sure to put a link into the chat for that before I sign off.
That is awesome. That would be very helpful, and I'll definitely include that in our little emails I'm sending out to folks. I'm watching the clock, and I just wanted to, I'm going to read you a couple chats. So somebody's saying loves the classic patterns, something she can knit and keep in her wardrobe for years and wear many different ways. You say simple, I hear classic. And then
nice. That's true.
Some other folks who were saying, yep, this is my first sweater, and agree with that. Somebody else thanking you for putting that stitch count at the end of each section. So yeah, that's super. And somebody who's super excited for the lighter pullover.
Good. Nice.
So yeah, anyway, I just want to give a moment. Does anybody out there in Zoom land have a burning question for Elizabeth? You can either chat it or unmute yourself. So tricky to do wait time on Zoom.
Yeah, I know you got to give people a little time to be able to chat, especially when everyone's knitting at the same time. That's always a tricky thing with the, there's only so many hands that we have.
Well,
I can ask a quick question. I don't know if somebody else is already asking. Yeah.
great.
Hi, thank you. This is so fun.
Yeah.
Both of you. I have a question about the instructions in the pullover. I'm going to be making the pullover, not for a while. Unfortunately, I joined the knit along and then I fractured my wrist.
Oh
So
no.
I'm going to have to wait a little while, but I'm getting in with it anyway to see, because I want to be involved in all the learning. But on the very first page of the instructions, because I'm just reading in advance, it looks to me like it skips from row 6 to row 9, and I'm not sure if that's true. And I just don't, because I'm looking at it going, well, where's row 7 and row 8? And I wonder if there's a doubled up or.
Yeah,
you know,
I have it up here to be able to. So the reason is because you're repeating rows 5 and 6 one
5
more
and 6.
time. So
Great.
that would be
Okay.
row 7 and 8, and then the yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It may
you're
not have
welcome.
printed off well for me, and so
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I really appreciate that. So repeat
Yeah,
it.
all good. Yeah.
That's great. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I do have so all of my patterns, especially all my new patterns, and I've been in the process of going back to my older patterns and making updates, adding more sizes, adding more tutorials, things like that. And every time I do an update or anytime I release a new pattern, I always create a tips page that's associated with it. And Ramona is included, and the tips page really works for any of the versions of Ramona. I do note on the tips page if there's a certain thing that's really just relevant for the cardigan or just relevant for the pullover. But it's definitely good to kind of take a look at that, even if you wind up getting to parts after the knit along here is over, you can always refer back to the tips page for that. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew, and there's links to different tutorials on that as well.
That is amazing. And I have been including that as some of the resources that I've been sending out to folks
Oh,
too.
wonderful.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
wonderful. It's very helpful, I find, to be able to, that's why I've been doing tips page for all my designs, because I think it's helpful to have a place that you can go online to be able to link to all the different YouTubes. I had started a YouTube channel a couple of years ago, and I'm always uploading new videos. So even if I will update those tips page from time to time as I create new videos for everything. But I do try to make sure that any technique that is in any of my patterns, that the tips page has a link to a photo tutorial or a video tutorial. If it's not one that I've created yet, I'll link to one that I recommend that I think is a good resource.
Love that. Okay, this is a really great question, but I want to honor your time. Do you have time for one more?
Yes, I have time for one more.
Okay, so it's so cool. So Lillian is asking, in general pattern making, how do you figure out the stitch counts for the different sizes? And that's such a cool question.
Yeah, so this kind of ties into my love of Excel spreadsheets. So a lot of yeah, actually I should say all of my patterns, especially if they're garments, I have an Excel worksheet that I calculate everything in. There's no way to do, because a common question I get is, oh, well, do you just have a template that then you apply to every single design? And the answer to that is no, because every design is a little bit different, and how you grade the pattern. And by grading, I mean how you determine all the row counts and stitch counts and the measurements for each of the different sizes. That's the term of pattern grading. It's different depending on the type of design it is. It's different depending on the fiber you're using and the gauge. How I design Ramona pullover is going to be a little different than how I design the Ramona light pullover, because it's bulkier yarn will hang off of your body a little bit different than lighter weight yarn. So every pattern has a completely different spreadsheet. And I do a lot of charting in that. So I have worksheets where I literally chart out with different cells, sort of figuring out, well, how would this shaping look? And then I tie a lot of formulas together. And so the actual stitch counts I pull from my Excel spreadsheet, and all of my patterns are always tech edited by a professional tech editor. And so they will also be looking at my Excel spreadsheet and comparing it to the actual document to make sure that all of the stitch counts are correct. It looks great. I always say that if somebody were to look at my Excel spreadsheets, I think they might, it's a little crazy because there's tons of rows, different highlights and things like that. It makes sense in my head because I've created it. But it's also fun because for me, that part is actually the big problem solving. It's like it's the thing you're trying to solve, because a lot of things have to be a certain stitch count depending on the stitch pattern that you're using. So trying to figure out how different formulas and everything will work is like a puzzle that you're trying to solve. So it's definitely where creativity and math merge into a fun, at least for me, a very fun experience.
Oh, wow, that was perfect. And thank you so very much for being here. Really wonderful to hear about your process and hear about you as a designer. And we're all having a great time with your designs. So thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. And I just look at the chat. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of your kind words. And I'm so excited that you all are knitting it. And I look forward to seeing your finished photos. And feel free to, if you ever have any questions that you're looking for an answer, I try to always be accessible. So my email is in the pattern. So feel free to always send me a message, and I'm always happy to help. So thank you, everyone.
Great. And maybe we'll see you up at the Cashmere Goat sometime too.
Yes, I love it. I love Camden. So yes, I haven't been up there in quite a while. I think I actually stopped by the Cashmere Goat when it first opened many years ago, but I haven't been able to get back since. So yes, I definitely would love a trip up there soon.
We've got a great new shop location too.
Yes, I heard. Right. I know. I can't wait to check it out. So definitely. Great.
All right. Well, have a great evening, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Happy knitting, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. And for everybody else who's here, feel free to stay on the Zoom and knit with us, or if you need to run and boogie, feel free to do that. This is much more casual, informal. Feel free to unmute. We'll just sort of take a look at who's here and share our progress, ask each other questions, all of that stuff if you would like. But I'm going to stop our recording because we probably don't need that anymore.